Yo, what's up everyone? This is Base here to remind you that this is part 2 of our discussion on why your anime fandom might go deeper than you think. If you haven't listened to part 1, which aka is episode 5, make sure you go back and do that. Remember, as always, to give us your feedback on Twitter and iTunes. And with that, let's jump back into the discussion.
The sort of like thing that I wanted to touch on first to start off is just like, in doing my research, I came across okay, well, like I had this inclination, like punk is like comes from like, like working guys like tied to like working class politics or like whatever. That came from a comment that Mike, and I can't really remember his last name, from Bonsai Pop makes in some of his like videos, where he like says that anime is punk rock cartoons, and he like his whole lived experience, like he really grounds it in like, like his like like of anime and like his experiences as like someone who liked punk growing up, but yeah, and punk as something that was very anti-status quo, anti like white upper middle class like corporate America values, and so I did a deep dive into that, and what I came across is that there's a lot of fucking variety within punk and music, oh my god, but British punk really, like bands like The Clash and like Sex Pistols, like really had this whole like decrying of like, they were really tied to like anti-capitalism and working class politics and calling out like unemployment in like the 70s. American punk in like the 70s was kind of different. It like was really middle class kids complaining about like middle class alienation, but without the class politics of like British punk. And the big article that sort of like helped me out here, which is like called The Evolution of Emo and Its Theoretical Implications. Horribly pretentious title, but you know what, whatever, we're just gonna go with it, because it's not like I'm horribly pretentious or anything. Anyways,
who would ever think that?
But anyways,
Silver, are you getting jumped?
What?
Or are you just saying what?
Yeah,
like,
saying what, not ironically.
Oh, I'm like, have you been? I was like, do we need to get over there? I was like, is something happening?
Someone's attacking him. We're roommates. Someone's attacking him in our own home, and I didn't even realize it until you pointed that out.
Dang, the podcast must go on then. Hey, just turn off your mic, okay? Just make sure whenever you get mugged.
I'll tell that to the person that's trying to stab me in the eye.
Yeah, and if he tries to stab me too, I'll turn it off too. You, Base, you and Shaw will have to continue on foot.
Yeah.
But anyways,
then Tropical World Squad will really be gone.
My god.
No, it's okay.
But yeah,
we'll come back for you when it's over.
But yeah, as I was sort of saying with American punk, that sort of lack of class politics can be largely attributable to like the Red Scare and just how demonized like working class politics were in like the US, but even so, like bands like the Ramones still like had these like kind of like depictions of like middle class like life as like empty and as like kind of like so like unfulfilling and alienating that they were doing things like huffing glue to pass the time, or like doing drugs and shit. You know what I'm saying? Like it was still this like grim portrayal of like middle class life, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. But then on the like what I also found in like reading other stuff is that like there was actually like a politicized punk in the US, and that was like hardcore punk, which sort of came about in the 1980s around the same time that hip hop was coming about, but it was politically charged against like Ronald Reagan, and it was sort of like to the point where like there's like an anecdote of like one of like Reagan's obituaries like mentioning how a vocalist for like a hardcore pop band like called and asked like the audience who had the biggest impact in growing like the genre, and then the person, like the vocalist, saying that it was Reagan, and like Reagan's image was on like distorted and like on CD covers and flyers and posters and shit. There's even a group that called itself like the Reagan Youth, which is kind of crazy to think about, but it was like at the same time as like you had these like like hawkish like neoconservatism of like Reagan, like affecting like the life of like like working class, like white working class people. You had the same shit kind of going on with like like the impact that the Reagan administration had on like black folks and people of color, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, and so you had rap kind of forming and that kind of backdrop too. I'm really
And
monologuing here.
No, you
speaking,
good,
well,
you
I was just
good.
gonna say, speaking of all these people coming together from different undercurrents of the like dominant class, one of the things I researched I shared with you was this study that they actually did on the link between subjective social class and aggression. Um, some caveats. It was done in China. It was done on a majority of on women, and the study itself, like, obviously we're gonna put a lot of our research in the notes of this episode. So if you guys want to go ahead and read that to the listeners, obviously you can form your own opinions on this. But basically, the main idea was so subjective social class, which is the class that in your head you feel that you occupy, is heavily linked to genuine feelings of aggression. Because the idea is that the subjective social class that you have leads you to think that you have less control over your life and less support systems. And because of that, it increases what these researchers call the negative effect, which in turn enhances aggression and aggressive feelings. And that can clearly be seen in the type of music, the type of culture. I mean, all of us here have talked about how like the jokes people have had about like usually darker skinned people being loud, being so celebratory, always like causing a ruckus or something. But a lot of that does stem from a genuine feeling of like, no, we have to express ourselves because we're subjected to like all these subconscious forces that are, you know, in some ways like basically telling us that we ain't shit, like, you know, all that stuff. And then the main thing I also want to say about this paper wasn't, just so I cover all my bases and someone doesn't go and get it twisted, that, oh, the minorities are actually worse and more aggressive. No, the research has also found that like the best way to mitigate these feelings is like enhanced social support systems.
Yeah.
You know, sort of just advocating that like, yes, maybe we should help the people that have it the worst lot in life, you know? No, I'm not out here just trying to replace the hierarchies with someone else. No, we should use all of our money to help these people because they are suffering.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because it reminds me of a quote that I saw one time that T.I. made. So people, and there's, you know, throughout the history of rap, there's been several moral panics about like, you know, like the content of rap lyrics or whatnot. But there's this quote by T.I. He was being interviewed one time, and they asked him like, you know, like about like those like lyrics of like rap or whatever, and he said, you know, if you want to like people sing about like their like something along the lines of like, I'm paraphrasing, you know, but something along the lines of like, you know, like if people are singing about their like lived experiences, like their material conditions, you know what I mean? And so if you want to like change the content of rap, change the material conditions of people, you know what I'm saying? And that's just a quote that has like really like stuck with me in a lot of ways. But it's interesting to sort of, you know, I just to pivot really quickly on that. There were like aspects of like hardcore punk that, you know, it was on the one hand like quite niche, you know, but there were issues with it. Like it was also like, you know, like aggressiveness is like tied to this basis point about aggressiveness. It was like hyper masculine, and like frankly like it attracted like racists. Like like in the article that I read had like, you know, like research supporting that you know, skinheads, like racist skinheads would like show up, and like their brawls would break out in like, you know, like concerts and whatnot. And so, and one of the things that happened, you know, sort of as like an offshoot of like hardcore punk, was the development of like emotional hardcore or emo core or first wave emo. But
You want to throw more adjectives on there? You know, I'm just writing them down.
just writing them down. But yeah, emo was interesting. And first, you know, like emo was interesting because of the way that, you know, and this is like in the 1980s, like it sort of like very consciously like adopted this more like melodic, you know, like sonic quality to it, but also like, you know, de-emphasize like heavy political content and like focus more on like, you know, like social alienation, teen angst, like romantic relationships and stuff. And that's something that we still see in like, you know, emo, like the emo movement that happened while all of us here, millennials, were in like middle school and high school. But
wait, do we even
I
count
don't
as
think I
millennials?
think we're Gens.
We're not.
The Zoomers, generals.
Oh,
we're Gen
so
Z.
had this debate with several other people before, where because generations aren't like
Oh.
fixed.
No. The ages
But-
are 1981 to 1996.
Hey, I'm a millennial
Y'all,
boy.
I'm that
So
young.
I am
Gen
not.
Z,
I am
boys.
Gen Z.
Hey, high
I'm Gen Z,
five.
boy. Hey.
Gen Z squad, look at y'all.
Okay, Zoomer.
Oh,
Wow, don't fight your.
Wow, I came here for a good time and now I feel so attacked.
You're so obsessed with
Oh,
yoga
well.
and kale chips,
And avocados.
avocado
Um,
toast.
Yo, don't even get me
Hey,
started.
man.
I could go on for hours about the Avocado Wars. Don't even get me started. It's a real thing. There's an entire state in Mexico that is run 100% by avocado money. The cartels are beneath the avocados. I am not kidding.
No, I know. I've actually heard of this before. But anyways, emo kids.
We're leaving that in.
Yeah. So there was a second wave of emo that was in the 1990s. And it sort of like coasted or rode on the coattails of like Nirvana, like the grunge movement. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it wasn't really
And
all
Velvet
that popular.
Underground.
Velvet Underground, thank you, Silver. But then like the emo that we know now is, if you want to call it third wave emo, is like this emo that had like middle class roots and was sort of like distanced from like overly subversive norms, like the stuff that was like the background, of like the backdrop of punk music. And emo is interesting, it's interesting to do research on this stuff because I had like my like position significantly like challenged and refined as I was reading about this stuff on like what I thought emo was. But emo is pastiche, man. And what I mean by that is that it's sort of this like cultural phenomenon that like incorporates like dress styles of like indie rock fans, like like graphic t-shirts, black rimmed glasses, like Vans, mid-length hair, goth and like punk preferences for like black or neon colors, like hand warmers, skinny jeans, skulls and crossbones, like dyed hair. And so it's interesting in the way that like emo like takes like from, it's like a compilation of like elements from like different like past movements, kind of like emptied out in some cases of like their like political content. Like punk was like hella political, you know what I'm saying? And so emo wasn't really in the same way. At least that's like what I came across from like the research that I was doing. You know what I mean?
yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, but it's interesting,
Zeus.
like by Zeus, but it's interesting that emo is like also like it's kind of like contentious in the sense that it's like it's kind of composed of like this like eclectic music taste. There's like very few bands that like actually like self-identify as like emo bands, not counting My Chemical Romance and like Good Charlotte, and emo like didn't like denounce consumer culture in the same way that like punk did, for example. You know what I mean? Like for emo kids, like this is like something like almost like really like when you talk about it, it's like, whoa, oh yeah, of course, you know what I mean? Like emo kids, like they bought clothes in like large chains, like Hot Topic, you know what I mean? And like the stuff that they kind of put on themselves, like the accessories were centered on like pop icons, superheroes, protagonists and motifs from like cult movies. I raised this to Silver a little while ago, but I was like, if there are two things that immediately conjure up images of emo kids, it's The Nightmare Before Christmas and Invader Zim.
Those some both, but I was like, that was not the first thing I thought about. But now that you say that, okay.
Not to say that other people can't enjoy these things, you know what I mean, or anything that like emo kids enjoy. Like like I had like a phase where I was like almost emo, you know what I mean? Like
It'd be like that.
and we'll get to like the I don't want to like drop the punchline in there, like the end of it in there, but we'll get to like a point where like emo like comes back, you know what I mean? And it's still like relevant. But yeah, man. What's interesting is that there were reasons, you know what I mean, for like this article, right? There were reasons for like why argue that there were reasons for why emo evolved as it did. And part of it had to do with like the Columbine shooting in like 1999 and the way that like, so emo like took aspects of the goth aesthetic, but after that shooting, like the goth aesthetic, you know, like sort of like, you know, frilly dresses, black and red colors, etc. It was demonized. Exactly. It was demonized. And I just want to quickly point out that the goth aesthetic, you know, according to like the ContraPoints video on opulence, but also some other articles that I read on the internet. And you know, you can always trust the internet. But anyways, 100% of the time. But the goth aesthetic, you know, sort of kicked off in like 18th century like Europe. There's of course like the goth like, you know, music movement, and Silver would be more capable of speaking to this. But it sort of had this like underwriting aesthetic of like a decrepit upper class that like leached off of the working class as insane itself. That's how you sort of get like the idea, like the whole concept of like a vampire, which is literally like an aristocrat sucking the blood of like a peasant to maintain itself alive. You know what I'm saying?
I don't like the way you're talking about this, man. You are getting way too enthused.
There's definitely an eroticism incorporated with the mythos of vampires and all
You
that.
want to talk to us about that?
Are you saying he's hitting on me? Tropical, are you hitting on me?
Yes, I'm hitting on you. Deal with it. You can do what you want with it.
Oh, I mean, if you only saw what I was wearing, I was clearly asking for it.
Oh boy.
Okay. delete. All right.
Pause. We'll be back.
Again, I just finished Death Note, so it makes me think to like the successor of like Yagami was just like delete.
Of course. All right. What I guess is wondering. Okay, so we've gone through the emo and the goth aesthetic, and then linking that back to anime.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's also just super quickly, like, I mean, rap. You know what I'm saying?
Of course. Yes.
We got to talk about rap too. But
Is there a rap anime at all?
Oh
wondered
yes,
that.
there's so.
I don't.
A
Samurai
rap
Champloo
anime?
has rap all in it. That new anime, what's it called? Not how to.
Afro Samurai?
No, not, well, also Afro Samurai, but that's a whole black protagonist. What's? Hold up. This is
Wait.
It's not really.
Guys.
Afro Samurai isn't a rap anime.
hip hop antics.
guys.
Samurai Champloo for
guys.
sure.
Let me take
Yes.
us back for a second because I just realized something.
Oh, okay.
I got the link. This occurred to me while I was watching Death Note. The link is Death Note, guys. Like, Death Note is such an emo and gothic. Like, Death Note screams emo. You know what I'm saying?
you were talking
Like the
about rap.
melodrama and the fact that the girl, I don't remember her name, but she was Misa Amane was like gothic, and like the way the Shinigamis looked and all that. Like, Death Note was like the emo anime. You know what I'm saying? So like there's one like place where like these people with these like values, you know, could have potentially like seen themselves represented, you know, in anime. You know, that's like one possible point of entry, not to mention other like possible points of entry for like, you know, emo kids into like anime. But yeah, man.
No, I remember Death Note being the show that, like, okay, obviously I watched like a bunch of the shonen shows on like Toonami. I watched Pokemon as a kid and all that stuff. But sometime around like high school, I want to say like I kind of fell out of anime, or at least the only anime I watched was like, oh, I remember this Naruto fight. Oh, I remember this Dragon Ball fight. Oh, I remember this Yu-Gi-Oh card battle, but I wasn't really watching it. And then in college, someone suggested I watch Death Note. And again, I mean, Death Note is all what I use right now is if I have a friend, for example, who's like has no idea like what anime can be beyond just like what they remember from like being children and just being like action shows, I show them Death Note. Because one, the dub is great, and if someone's like, oh, I don't want to read subtitles, then I'm like, okay, the dub of Death Note is incredible, so you don't have to read and you can watch it like a normal show. Two, it's obvious from like the first episode that this show isn't just about like oh, it's that show where that Asian cartoon where people punch each other and scream a lot. And I'm like, no, it's clearly a subtle, like, pacing, like, very, like, I don't want to say intellectual because that maybe sounds like, oh, I'm big brained, like, you gotta understand Death Note. No,
5,000 IQ.
but it is a, no, yeah, but no, it's a thinking show. Like, it's like you pick up new things even when you watch it again the second time, but it's enjoyable. Oh, sorry, I dropped something. It's enjoyable all the way through, except for the last third. We don't have to talk about that, but it's definitely the show that, like, from the first opening, like, theme songs through all of its imagery, all that stuff, this feels like an adult, like, show that centers around themes that, whoa, like, even though as a child I could probably watch this and get it, there's actually so much in here that is actually made for adults, you know?
And I think jumping onto that, another emo phase, if we have to look at it, we can look at one of the big three, at least the old big three, and talk about Bleach. Like, literally, these are all brooding soul, like, literally Soul Reaper. They're dead. They only wear black. They all have swords. Like, I feel like that also affects so much of the anime culture in itself, especially popularity-wise. When it was, like, hot.
Bleach.
When Bleach was hot.
Bleach was another emo anime for sure. And I think what is it? Base. I also had like a similar like turn away from anime. Frankly, like a lot of it for me was like, I mean, just being real, you know, it was like kind of like shame and like the way that like anime was kind of like grouped together, you know, with like, I mean, it was grouped together with the emo kids, but it also had this like you know, and there's
freaking
like,
nerd.
no, there were,
You're
yeah,
one of those
exactly,
kids that
yeah,
Naruto runs to lunch,
exactly,
aren't you?
but like, yeah, but like the emo kids like thing, like emo as like being linked to like that stuff, but also as like being linked to like with, you know, the classic like jock / geek binary, but also like, you know, like the like self-mutilation, and like there were all these like negative images about like emo, you know. And the other thing was like, as like, you know, someone who, you know, was like working class but like also like a person of color, like there was this whole other side, and so I turned to like, you know, like hip hop and like in my case like reggaeton and like Latin, well, no, that's later on, but yeah, like reggaeton and stuff, and so I turned to like that, you know what I mean? I still sort of maintain kind of like a passive interest in anime, you know, because I think in some ways, like, you know, we sort of touched on this a little bit already, but like that was another entry point for me into anime, you know, like the, like, you know, like rap and like my interest in like, you know, those kinds of cultures, because of the way that like they too, like rap emerged and like reggaeton emerged as like an art form for like working class people who are talking about conditions of like economic and racial oppression, you know what I'm saying? And we're very like anti status quo as well, you know. And then anime is sort of like in some ways like reflecting, you know, through like shows like Akira or like whatever, I mean movies like Akira or like shows like DBZ and all that stuff, like, you know, giving that like entry point that like connected to like rap or whatever. Does anybody have some other thoughts on like rap and like the relation of like rap to like anime? Because I know we were kind of in that before I kind of like sidetracked us back into emo and Death Note.
So we were talking, and like we were all discussing about like, you know, I think one of the first things we obviously like when it comes to like rap and anime is like you think of the Afro Samurais, which was literally had Samuel L. Jackson lead at like part of it. The RZA made the music for it, and like you also think of Samurai Champloo, which to be fair I haven't watched, but I've listened to like a lot of the songs, and it's obviously like hip hop used in the songs is influencing some of the soundtracking. But when it comes to the explicit link between rap and anime, one of the things we tried to look up was like RZA had this whole quote, RZA of the Wu-Tang Clan, about how Dragon Ball Z and how much black people can like gain from watching it. Now, to be fair, Wu-Tang Clan in itself, their entire like artistic vision is very heavily like
on Shaolin
I mean
style.
The name Wu-Tang Clan. Shaolin style, like they're into the, you know, Chinese or East Asian general aesthetic, and it influences their philosophy and their art and all that. And admittedly, it's pretty thick and kind of like it's you have to like read a lot to like understand it. I'm not saying I understand it at all. It's just one of those things where it's like it's pretty unique to them. It's not universal, but like RZA himself said like, oh, the Saiyans are a very good representation of black people and also marginalized people in general. They got displaced from their home planet, as everyone knows in DBZ. Their home planet was obliterated. There's only a few of them left scattered throughout the universe, and they have to work and like come together to fight even bigger and greater threats that are systematically opposed to the existence of their peoples. Because like that's the whole reason Frieza blew them up in the first place. He feared their power of them together. So there's that. Other explicit links between hip hop and anime. I mean, there are some YouTubers that always do like sort of like quote unquote hood anime videos, and I personally haven't watched too many of them. It's not something I've really necessarily delved into. Has anyone else? Does anyone else have some comments on it?
I have too many comments on it, so I hope y'all are ready.
Go for it.
Hit us,
Please,
Texas
take your
Ranger.
time.
Preach your truth.
I'm so hurt. This is my specialty. But no, looking at like hip hop and anime, there's some from RDC World to Vader. I know you've seen the black guy doing the dancing, and then he always brings in so many anime references. Like there's a whole niche of like black people who watch anime who do funny things, either with anime or about the tropes. Caleb City, and looking at in anime in general, and like not even as more recent. So we see Naruto. There's a whole ninja. If y'all all seen Shippuden, Killer B. My boy is a whole rapper.
Oh.
So, like whether he's good or not, and if we want to question the ethics of having all the black people only from the hidden cloud, which is we can talk about that later. But he's a full rapper in it. And we have another anime called Devilman Crybaby, or yeah, something like that. It's a newer. But people have told me to watch it because of, oh yeah, they have ciphers on it. It's had nothing to do with rap, but like rap is heavily put in there. And there's so much cultural between it.
Yeah, I've watched Devilman Crybaby.
Oh, yeah?
And the ciphers are used as sort of like, you know, a wave. It's just these specific characters that are literally just freestyling in the streets, and they are used to recap sort of sometimes the general themes and the feelings of the show. Yeah, okay, yeah, I see what they're saying.
Yeah. Thoughts on anime and rap but that goes to the whole conversation of black people and Asian people for their culture have a very interesting history though, in general.
You want to go into that a little bit?
All right, now it's time to get political. So it all started with communism. Like, but like actually though, it was in the third wave communism when you see, so those
Daddy
groups.
Marx.
Honestly, like it's funny that I say that, but it's so true because we have SNCC, Marcus Garvey, and like all these other members of black nationalists who joined up with Cuba, who then joined up with China communism and Japanese and different groups in Asia, because these were like three, though at least Cuba and Asia were leading their own countries, and there were people of color. So we see between this whole three idea talking about making communism all for we first have to abolish and create civil rights to even have a communistic state. We see different culture exchanges, we see different conversations, and through this we see the beginning of this literally triad of what's it called, of cultural, I don't even know what to call it, a cultural cycle, to where we have like in Asia b-boy, and then like in New York you see Asian b-boys like coming into like dancing, breakdancing, all that. Blaxploitation, which is now literally black people in kung fu films in black settings. Like just whole, if you want to call that cultural appropriation or cultural borrowing, because everyone was, I guess, trading in a sense, was going on for this to bring about like, which led to like, oh, anime and hip hop, bet. Like I've been to Korea and like rap is everywhere. Whether you believe it or not.
And then you got with whatchamacallit, like with you know, Samurai Champloo, for example, or you know, you have like, there's actually like a whole, I came across this, I didn't necessarily read his books, but there's an academic who did like an anthropologist who did like an ethnography of like hip hop in Japan, you know, like Japanese hip hop, like that's a whole thing, you know what I'm saying? Like there's a Japanese hip hop scene. And if you look at like someone who like jumps out to me, like I came across his work a while back, like a little while ago. But I think you do see still like in the type of hip hop that he does, which is like lo-fi hip hop, you do see like, you know, Asian influenced tracks and lo-fi hip hop, and maybe like Japanese influenced tracks and like Japanese artists like working on like lo-fi hip hop. But like you know, it's like Nujabes, and like he was someone who like I think he did a lot of the soundtrack for Samurai Champloo, and like the creator of Samurai Champloo, I mean, if I'm right about this, is someone who like, you know, like as we sort of said, like did take direct influence from, you know, like hip hop.
No, yeah, I completely agree. And I've listened to Nujabes. Yeah, he basically, if Samurai Champloo had a song, is like more than 100% by him. And like looking at like, it's cool that you brought up lo-fi, because lo-fi leads into like so much Japanese streetwear. If you've ever seen like those type of clothes, like it'll be like different Asian aesthetics and then mixed in with like hip hop, and that's like it's baggy or it looks militarized. It's a real like just lo-fi culture is like an interesting mix and a good point to go off of to see Japanese and hip hop culture.
Would it be fair to say that some of the aesthetics of hip hop with their, you know, the whole counterculture like basis of it being like, oh, we're gonna tell our troops, we're gonna tell it how it is, this is what we're gonna do, and you're gonna listen to it, because right now hip hop is the most popular genre in the world. They had to fight and get that way. Like the FBI tried to stop them at one point. Could that also be paired with the ideas of how when a lot of these animations came out over to the West, at least, that it was something new, it was something we had never seen. Like I had never seen people actually fight on TV before, at least in animation. Like, yeah, I watched Power Rangers, and yeah, they fought people, but even as a kid, I kind of knew they weren't really hitting each other. Yet when I watched anime and I saw like blood on a cartoon for the first time, even though when they censored it, when Naruto was still showing, there was still blood. There were still people openly talking about death, people openly talking about like feelings of loneliness, feelings of isolation, feelings of subjugation, like even aspects of like being held as like a captive, being resented by everyone around you, and all of these things, where it's like a lot of these bigger, stronger ideas that arose oftentimes out of anime, or even something like Akira, where people were talking about, or even Akira and a lot of other sci-fi anime, such as Ghost in the Shell, and their whole like message of like what does it mean to be human, and the fight against like these huge mega corporations of the future, and how like we commodify everything and so on and so forth. So could it be said that like a lot of the links of the counterculture of hip hop is also in the same vein of the counterculture in a lot of the anime that we watched as kids, because it was something that wasn't the normal, you know, Saturday morning cartoons. It wasn't the normal situational comedy, even animated, that The Simpsons and Family Guy went for. It was something completely different.
Yeah, absolutely, bro. And I think that that's like that probably also holds true for like emo or punk, or like, you know, like people who are inclined to like rock. You know, like rock also has this like history as like, you know, granted there's been different moments like, you know, where it's been like more or less commercialized, same with hip hop, you know, but like there have also been moments and like foundational, you know, artists who were very anti-status quo, you know what I mean? People who sung about like, you know, economic like as I said, with like the whole like British punk and like hardcore punk in like the US, you know, who sang about like economic like you know, oppression and whatnot. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely spot on in pointing out that it's like, you know, and that's like completely counter to like what anime depicts, like those experiences, like completely counter to what you know, like is like depicted in like the Disney model of animation. You know, like granted these days like you'll see like more quote unquote woke Disney movies, you know what I mean, with like Frozen or whatever, but ultimately if you look at like movies like Frozen or, you know, whatever like other Disney movies you want to point out, one thing that they are missing, you know, like they might be like progressive with respect to like, or more progressive with respect to like gender, for example, which is not to even get into the whole, like, this is making me think of like Wreck-It Ralph and like the scene with like the princesses in Wreck-It Ralph or Wreck-It Ralph 2. I don't know. I haven't seen the second one. But there's the whole thing. Yeah, but there's the whole thing where it's like Disney.
Lip service.
Disney, it was lip service to, gender equality, but it's like particularly hypocritical coming out of Disney because Disney is like, and I think Silver, you're the person who informed me of this, but it like makes too much sense that Disney was like foundational in terms of like establishing like the princess archetype of like these like submissive domestic woman, and then they're coming out here and talking about princesses can do things too. But that's a bit of a tangent. The thing that I wanted to say is that one thing that we still don't really see coming from Disney all that much is these like kind of like working class value centered narratives. You know what I mean? Like you don't really see that all that much, if at all, from Disney, or like reflecting those like harsher material conditions of struggle that people have to like the vast majority of the world has to deal with. And the sort of like anti-status quo values that might follow from that, like fuck the man, or like the system doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for my people type of thing. But with anime, that kind of messaging is possible, and that kind of messaging is out there. You know what I mean? It's a different model that depicts those experiences. But it's yeah, man. I don't know. What do y'all think about that?
Just the idea that anime. I'm sorry. There was a lot talking. Just one sentence again.
Yeah, the idea that there was a lot there. The idea that a common link, like a reason, like a shared element between like rap, and its like anti-status quo variants, rock and like its derivatives and their anti-status quo variants. And like anime is the fact, like the possibility, like of having shared values, and shared values and shared experiences as something that attracts like people from that might be interested in like different, like very different like cultures. Like you often hear about like rock people, and like I see this all the time. Like I literally saw this in like a Discord server not too long ago. Every time I see it, I'm like, oh my god, like these people still exist. But like the people who are like the rockers who are like, ew, like screw rap is like blah, it's bad, blah 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 blah. Or like I'm sure you get that on like the hip hop side too, you know what I mean? But you get like in anime this kind of like bridge, you know what I mean? If that makes sense. That was like a very long run-on sentence, but you get what I mean.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, is that anime, as compared to other mediums, is better equipped to bridge that gap between... Am I in the right ballpark thinking about it?
Anime is like
It's like a bridge?
It's a conduit. Yeah, it is. It's a bridging, I guess, like you could say it's like a bridging medium between like these different sets of experiences. Or like different preferences.
Why do you think anime is probably the go-to medium to bridge these different experiences together versus Western animation? Is it because of Disney's cultural stranglehold on the model?
Yeah, so I think it's that connects to like the point about like Frozen or whatever, and Disney not depicting like anti-status quo working class like experiences and values, right? So like that's not there in Disney. In some ways it's like it's incompatible with like the foundational concepts of like the Disney model of animation, you know what I mean, which is like the centering of like the white upper middle class family, though it could be like like upper middle class family of any race or gender or sexuality potentially, you know what I'm saying, but it's like this upper middle class family to upper class family.
I mean, if you want to talk about Disney, you can even talk about how their sort of quote-unquote progressive viewpoints are nothing more than a distilled lip service version that doesn't actually challenge at all the status quo. Like, one of my favorite things that I always go back to, and I know this isn't exactly animation, but it's the best example I have of Disney's sort of like, hey, we're progressive. It's the scene in the Beauty and the Beast remake where Belle is teaching that girl how to read, and the old like white patriarchy just steps in and is like, teaching more girls to read? Ugh, useless. And it's just like, yes, people watching, isn't it silly that, like, women not learning how to read? Haha, good thing, you know, feminism is here to stop that, even though, like, at the time period that Beauty and the Beast takes place, women's literacy was, like, particularly high. It was not uncommon to see women reading. It wasn't really a thing. But, like, Disney obviously used that as that whole, like, this Beauty and the Beast is progressive for all you girls out there. You know what I mean? And it's just not actually fighting anything. It's doing that sort of like, oh, if I'm a part of the patriarchy, but let's just say I'm someone that hasn't come in contact with feminist ideals before, but if someone's like, oh, do you think girls should be allowed to read? I don't think I can think of a man, at least who's of his right mind, that would be like, no, they shouldn't be allowed to read. I'm pretty sure they would all be like, okay to read. But like the battles we're fighting now when it comes to things like feminism, racism, classism, colorism, and sexism and all that are more subtle now. It's a different type of battle. We're past all these like lip service, like, oh, black people are worse than other colors of people, or all Hispanics want to come and take your jobs. Like, obviously, I don't think anyone is going to say something. I shouldn't say obviously, because, well, let's just say on the news, there are some people out there who are saying some of these things, and it's just like, Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. But the battles we're fighting as those of the undercurrent of society, and not trying to make this like a suffering Olympics, not like, oh, we're all just in the dredges of the dirt, but it is a constant like thing that you're reminded of, that the institutions in place are a lot more built in and are a lot more, how should we say, like systematic than they are just outright like, hey, stop teaching that girl to read. Girls shouldn't learn how to read. It's a lot more like subtle, and the fact that Disney hasn't tackled any of these just shows again, like in that whole princess scene in Wreck-It Ralph 2, does everyone think your problems are solved by a big strong man coming to save you? Ugh, look at how progressive we are. Meanwhile, the rest of the movie does absolutely nothing to play into that, like, at all. The scene is just a throwaway scene that they put in the trailer to be like, look, we can make fun of ourselves. Keep the money train coming. Keep the money train coming. Oh, look at all this dough. Oh my God.
Yeah, man, it's the corporatization of diversity. Or capitalization, depending on how you feel. Both. But,
both.
To sort of both, yeah. To sort of make like a, I guess like a, I don't know, final-ish like pivot, I think an interesting thing, and this might help drive the point home to people, it certainly was like a delicious nugget when I came across it. And sweet and sour sauce, bro, because we love that in McDonald's. Anyways,
sponsored by
the
commercial break.
Anyways, McDonald's, Ronald Senpai, please throw some money my way. I'm just kidding.
This podcast is sponsored by
Raid Shadow Legends.
Raid Shadow Legends.
Raid Shadow Legends.
You ever feel criminalized by corporations? You can make your own strong, independent woman on Raid Shadow Legends Warrior.
Oh my God.
Anyways,
for clarification, we are not sponsored.
Yeah, we're not. No. The last thing I wanted to point out was sort of bring attention to emo rap, man. Like, emo rap is like the dominant, like it's it's mainstream nowadays. I'm not gonna say it's dominant, but it's like mainstream now. Like people like Lil Uzi Vert, Juice WRLD, or whatever. And something that's super interesting about emo rap is like, well, on the one hand, like it brings emo culture and like emo themes and stuff like in like synthesis with like rap, but like what is like present in like emo rap, man? Anime, bro. Like anime is so present in emo rap, it's insane, man. Like emo rap is like, yeah, bro, like emo rap, it's just interesting how you have like, you know, like for example, like a video with like Lil Uzi Vert, you know what I mean? Like everybody who's in like the video, and I'm talking about P's and Q's, like literally turning into anime characters in the video and like recreating, like, you know, like it's like a slice of life, like high school type of like anime, but then they also have like a shonen-esque battle, you know what I mean? And so like you like dude, you know what I'm saying? Like it's crazy. You can see like this like synthesis. I think it's like dope, you know, like doing this like research made me like have like a higher appreciation for emo rap, I think. You know what I mean? And emo rap is like, I mean, there's all sorts of things that like, you know, it's not as easy with a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. It's not necessarily like causal claims that we're making. It's not like, you know, this leads to this or that. Shit is very complex. You know what I mean? But like you see like the fact that you see phenomena like emo rap, you know what I mean? Like the fact that you see phenomena like, you know, like that becoming so popular, but also bringing together these different sets of experiences and these different like aesthetics and all that, and synthesizing it and like having like, you know, anime be a part of that is like pretty dope in my opinion, and pretty indicative of the fact that like, you know, of the capacity of like anime to like bring together these like, you know, groups that are sometimes like see themselves as like diametrically like these like fan bases like whatever, or like these like that see themselves sometimes as like diametrically opposed to each other in like rock and rap, through I think this like shared rootedness and like experiences and values, you know what I mean?
So ultimately, go ahead. No, you got it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going. I'm starting. Okay. Well, no, like, and picking up off of that, I think that shows like so much. Not even just like in emo trends, because like you said, like Lil Uzi Vert has a whole song called Super Saiyan Trunks, and we see like a lot of, especially in Florida rappers. So Denzel Curry, I don't know if y'all have heard of him, but like
great album,
right?
Great album,
right? Emo rap, big emo rapper, but out of Florida. If you want to call him an emo rapper, all of his songs have emo references, and I think it just points to the popularity of just anime in general, because all these people are our age, and they are all, well, as you termed earlier, Toonami babies. Like, this is when all of us were all growing up when anime was accessible, a medium that you could watch, and it was out there. So going off of that, we see that anime in itself has transversed from being whatever popular medium it has to be over here in the West. And one thing I've been having on my mind, maybe it's away from anime, but looking at rap music itself, rap music has taken the place of rock music to talk about your woes and struggles. I know you were hinting and mentioning this earlier, but the fact that anime can now like easily move into it regardless of who's doing it just shows that claim as well.
Right.
I guess one of my if I want to just summarize all the things that we've read and things that we discussed from my end, has just been the discovery that like when it comes to the shows that were made for a palatable Western audience, a lot of the times, I mean, obviously there's always exceptions, there's always things that take influences from the undercurrents of society, but the dominant structure is so entrenched in place to this idea of conformity, tranquility, trying to keep the status quo alive. Even if you think they're critiquing it, like with satire or parody, it still is through the vein of like making sure that nothing ever really changes, that everything still fits into the models that we found as successful 80 years ago with Snow White, and so on and so forth. Thus, when we got these very honestly radically different shows that, even though maybe some of the things they talked about in the shows were themes we could identify with, because they were filtered through this medium that treated us as adults, that trusted us to think about these things as complex individuals, that weren't always necessarily looking for us to conform to our expectations and experiences, but were so foreign, both literally and figuratively, that it just had to attract us as those of us who are displaced out of mainstream culture itself, whether it be through our color, our race, our ethnicity, our language, our like the proper word for it, you guys know what I mean, our abilities to fit in with what is the expectation of the like white hetero male neurotypical structure. So for
Upper
anyone
class,
that doesn't
upper class.
upper class, you're right, upper class white hetero male neurotypical structure, able-bodied as well, that if you don't fall into that, you look for other outlets and to express yourself or to indulge in. And honestly, that's what I could say that anime has like done for me, because like I see the shows that get produced in the West, and a lot of them, I mean, there was even a time where I watched a video where like early 2010s, all these action cartoons were coming out with the anime aesthetic, but then there was some sort of like pushback against that where it was like too much. And like I look at the example of like Thundercats 2011 was a going show. It was pretty great. I watched the first season. It's obviously like anime inspired. It's following the Teen Titans model of having like a overarching storyline and so on and so forth. Got canceled, and now the new Thundercats that they're making is following the same vein as Teen Titans Go. Now, I don't want to get into a debate about the quality of Teen Titans Go. That's a show that a lot of people enjoy, and it's its own entire thing. It's made for kids. It accomplishes its goal. That's it. But you can clearly see where Western animation trends to go with their avenues of like, hey, this will make money. We have to make this like humorous, sort of like jokey show that like doesn't necessarily have an overarching story or any like themes that would like lead you to take the show for more than what it is and to incorporate into your own life. It's really much more for a laugh, a chance of escapism, just a slight little chuckle here and there, or something fun for you and your family. You know, it's not offensive. It's not going to like hurt you or challenge you in a lot of different ways. Whereas with anime, like, you get things that are challenging you all the time. Like, don't get me wrong, at this point there are also anime shows that fit that like, oh, this is just a nice show for people to enjoy. This is just something that we made because also there's the capitalization of anime that we'll get into later, which is like, yeah, they clearly made this just to make money. Don't get me wrong, there are still those elements, but still coming from a Western perspective, I just feel like the draw of it is that I was always looking for something different in my entertainment. Like, I was always listening to like rap and hip hop over pop music or just alternative types of entertainment. Therefore, when anime came in and it was the show that like was unlike anything else I had seen before, I was immediately gravitated towards it. And then when, you know, I got into college and got more confident in myself and not being labeled as one of those weird anime freaks because anime became mainstream, but also because I became more confident enjoying the media I enjoy, I got back into anime. And now I'm able to enjoy this wide variety of shows on my own time in a way that, like, you know, I think is pretty awesome. And the community itself also has a wide variety of people in it. Like, all four of us in here, I feel come from like different areas of life, and we all come together under this banner of anime.
Mm-hmm. And also just like mad fucking respect to the people who were able to hold it down and be weebs in high school. Like, mad respect to you all. We fucked up. We came around back to it. And I know some of y'all, I may not necessarily like know y'all deeply. You know, there are people that I think of, you know, when I think back to like my high school, you know, y'all were always, you know, willing and ready to hold it down and to, you know, like, be yourselves, dare to be yourselves, even if it came with like, you know, like stigmatization and, you know, getting backed in with all these like stereotypes or whatever. So props to y'all, like, for real, y'all had some bravery that I did not have back then, and I appreciate that I'm, you know, I've come around and that I'm friends with some of you all now, and I'm likely in Discord servers with some of you all now, and, you know, some of y'all listen to this podcast, I imagine. I hella appreciate y'all. Stay real, man. Stay real.
Speak your truth.
Naruto, run wherever you want to. We support.
Okay. Don't Naruto run wherever you want to. Like, enjoy the things you enjoy unabashedly. Also understand that other people do exist in the world and don't bother them. if that makes sense.
Well, actually, I'm gonna push back on that. How is Naruto running affecting other people? All it does, like, I mean, granted, if you're running into people, Naruto running, then that's not the problem.
That's just running into people. That's just the problem.
Yeah.
Right. I meant more along the lines of like, don't, like, obviously, like, being a fan of anything, we've all probably talked about, like, the toxicity of certain fan bases. Like, every fan base
My
has a
Hero
different topic.
Academia. Sorry, what?
Right.
What you
I mostly just meant that. Enjoy what you want to enjoy, but if other people don't enjoy it, don't necessarily attack them with your fandom. You know what I mean?
Be responsible
Yeah.
in your anime love. Anime responsible.
Yeah.
Remember to anime
responsibly.
That's how you
Dude,
say it.
remember to anime responsibly. I think
That'd
that's
be
the
the tagline.
title of this
That'd be the
podcast.
Don't
If
anime
you do start that
and
YouTube
drive.
channel, that'll be the community description: anime responsibly.
Followed by don't anime
Remember.
and drive.
Remember, some people might think of you as strange, foreign, and a little obtuse. Don't worry, they just don't understand. Follow these steps to introduce them to the anime you enjoy. Step 1, do not speak random Japanese phrases at them.
Ome wa mo shinderu.
They will not understand it.
Oh man.
Nutty.
Book coming soon.
All right. Yeah, all right, fellas. I think we've reached the natural lull in the conversation. It's likely time to sort of wrap up. I did want to say one last thing though. You know, with the sort of like mainstreaming of anime, which is happening, and which will continue to happen, and which will serve as one of like the points that will guide the reflection of our like next episode. Anime these days, and a lot of this has to do with like the I guess like the synthesis of like the crystallization of anime into like an aesthetic. Anime now is an aesthetic, you know what I mean? It is which means it is like it's a look that incorporates all these different things. Like it incorporates like like kind of like aspects of like punk and like emo fashion, but all like increasingly like hip-hop fashion, and part of this has to do with like the success of like the streaming services and all that, and getting anime out there. Part of this has to do with like our own work, like the work that we do as like fans of anime to spread like the joy of the medium around. And it's like it's dope in a lot of ways, but it's also something that we have to pay attention to, you know what I mean? Because if something's an aesthetic, it can how shall I put this, be capitalized upon, and be used in the interest of generating profits in a way that doesn't really like care about the people behind the aesthetic, you know what I mean? Like, because ultimately we are a fan base. We do care about how do I put this, ultimately we are a community. I want to make that distinction between community and fan base, because they're not necessarily the same thing, but we are a community and we do care about each other. That's it, fam.
But we'll talk about more of that next week.
Yeah.
Or I shouldn't say next week.
Next episode. So yeah, feel free to fam, thank you for tuning in and listening to this like very, very long discussion that kind of went circles and all over the place. We really appreciate it, and if you liked what you heard, even a fraction of it, please hit that follow button, you know what I mean? And follow us on Twitter at Boiz Anime. We
Spell it out for them.
BOIZ, Boiz Anime. Follow us on Twitter to engage with us. We want to speak with you all. We want to meet you all. We really appreciate your support. So yeah, peace, love, swag, everybody.
All right.
Peace.